welcome to Invisible, Breaking Through the Stigma of Addiction. I'm your host, Dean Anderson, and today we have a special guest. We have the Mayor of the City of London, Josh Morgan, on the show today. Thank you for being on the show.
Hey, my pleasure for being here.
You're such a busy guy, and it was really important to see that you take some time out to spend some time talking to the city about such an important issue as mental health and addiction.
Well, I am busy, but there are those issues that are impacting people across our city, and this is certainly one of them. And it's important for us to carve out the time to talk about them, because if we don't, it stays hidden as an issue, and it's something that people should be talking about. So I'm really happy that you've dedicated the time to invite me on and let me share some thoughts as well.
I love it. Thank you so much. I want to jump right into the State of the City address from January that you did, and I was able to peruse that last night and spend some time on it. I loved the way that you had talked about housing and what it meant to the community, but you said that that's not the only problem and that there's some underlying concerns there, and I'd love to hear more about your reflections on that.
Yeah, so what we have is a very complex intersection of issues, and one doesn't lead to the other. They feed into each other. So I'll give you an example. Homelessness, right? People don't become homelessness because they have a mental health challenge or an addiction challenge. They can, but it's not always the key driver. But if you are homeless, mental health and addiction challenges can cause that to be chronic homelessness and can stop you from breaking out. We can't always just put this together in simple terms. There's a number of things we need to be doing from a multitude of different facets to try to tackle these challenges. So in the State of the City, I tried to take some very complex issues, challenges that people know we're facing: housing affordability, homelessness, mental health challenges, addiction challenges in our city, policing, crime, safety, general quality of life, and talk about them in a way that was very genuine and real. So I didn't do a speech around, job creation or the economy of the city, which is where you tend to see mayors go in previous State of the City speeches. I wanted to tackle what I think people know to be the significant challenges that we face in the community, and mental health being one of them. And certainly, the state of our downtown, housing affordability in general, these are key things, but they intersect, which is why I'm supportive of a number of initiatives that drive towards more cross-collaborative solutions in these spaces.
Wonderful. I see this from the outside looking in, and from my role as an addiction counselor and in the front line, I see all of these complexities, and usually the outside voices are coming in and trying to oversimplify things. They come in and they're just like, hey, you just need to do this and it'll fix all your problems. Is there something specific that stands out to you that you think people are oversimplifying, that we could maybe shed some light to the viewers to say it's not that easy?
Yeah, I think what I hear often, maybe on the addiction side of things, is can't you just put people in rehab? And that's a complex thing. First off, what you don't want is just to put someone in rehab. You want someone to be successful on their journey through breaking their addiction, right? So you can't think about it in the same way. You have to think about it as from a people-centric approach. That means providing the safe space for someone to choose to take that first step in moving to the next stage of their life. And that's why, as we talk about health and homelessness and the way that we have to transform the system in the city, we talk about low barrier spaces, places where individuals who might be homeless, might have a mental health challenge, might have an addiction challenge, and those things all intersect. Because there's certainly people who have those challenges who are perfectly fine to carry on normal careers but have significant challenges with mental health. But where they intersect in those spaces, we create low barrier environments where people can come in, they can get the basic things they need, whether that's warmth, a shower, a laundry, maybe a bit of food, and move on. And if they come into that space and they say, actually, I want to take the next step in making my life better from their perspective, there's counselors in that space, there's health services in that space, there's housing services in that space. And so you're ready to receive people where they are on their journey and then help guide them along the path when they're prepared to do so. So that's more complex than, let's just get them into a program, because, people will leave a program if they're not ready for it. People will revert back to old patterns and old behaviors if they haven't built the foundation to be successful in their lives. And so what we need to do is create the spaces for building the foundation of those success on the terms and in the pace where people are at in their journey.
I love it. It's so true. I see it every day in my work. I see it right across. People have to want to change. They want to embark on that journey. They have to be ready to walk through that door that's been opened for them. And when we just push them in that direction, it usually causes more dissonance and more pushback than anything. And then people don't get the help that they really need. But it sounds like there's quite an elaborate amount of things happening for those frontline experiences for people.
Yeah, and it's, puts a lot of pressure, needless pressure on people to be successful when you don't approach it in a way that can really help them build their confidence, allow them to go through the steps. If you just say, you need to break this addiction, let's say, or you need to, address your mental health challenge. When they fail, you've put this tremendous amount of pressure that probably adds to their stress to say, I'm a failure, right? But if you walk with them along their journey and help them to the next step and the next step, even the steps backwards, which will often happen through this work, you're there along the journey and you lead to long-term, more successful outcomes. When we did our first winter response and we provided a safe, warm, secure space for 30 individuals, it was at a golf course. By the end of that process, 22 of those individuals ended up being stably, permanently housed that weren't successful before because they had an environment that had the supports and the services in it and ultimately led to what is better for everybody involved, whether it's those experiencing the challenge or those in the city who would like to see things change in the way that the city feels and the way that the downtown feels. That's ultimately the result that everybody wants, but it was much more successful by providing people the resources and tools they needed at the step that they're ready to take to get them into a space where we ultimately want them to get to, and that's a better position in their life that allows a higher level of self-sufficiency.
Wow. So why do you think that we don't hear, like, the 22 out of 30? That's a huge number. I mean, that's much bigger. I have experience with working within the shelter system in my past, and recognize that those numbers are usually significantly lower. So something like that, clearly there was something going on there. But why do you think we're not hearing about this? How come I didn't see this on the news? Or like, I feel like this is something that somebody should have been saying, hey, look at the success rate. They did something well here, and why is it not being replicated? Yeah,
well, there were also criticisms of our response in that it didn't meet the need. There were some challenges with having all of the services available in that response. It wasn't community-led, it was city-led. And so as we transitioned in what is our current winter response into a community-led response, we have a wider variety of services available, and we have many more members of the community hosting those services rather than just the city. And so we're meeting the needs of more people in more complex ways. And so maybe we didn't talk about the successes because we were focused on kind of taking the next step in making things better. But we probably should have. You talked about a shelter system. So why were we successful here and we weren't? Shelters serve an important purpose in stabilizing people's life. But congregating a whole bunch of people together in common services that may not fit the needs of all might not be the best way to approach this, which is why we've decided to transform the system, and that includes the way that we approach this at its base level. So when we talk about hubs in the city, we're talking about hubs for 20 to 30 people. And those hubs may be specific to some of the needs that individuals have. So when you think about the complex needs of, say, wraparound service supports, so what supports do we provide someone in their first stable housing experience? If you look at the work that YOU is doing, Youth Opportunities Unlimited, they're building Jones Place, which is a housing facility with wraparound services supports specifically for young or middle-aged women who have kids. And they're at risk of losing their kids because they don't have a housing situation, they can't provide food, and CAS may take them away into a safer environment. To provide that safe, stabilized space, there's a certain amount of wraparound services for that population that you're going to provide. It's going to be family-oriented. There's going to need to be programming for children. There's going to need to be specific supports for single mothers who might be trying to start a career or get a job, but have this huge challenge of single parenting, which is a difficult situation in itself. The services provided by YOU in that space will be very different than, say, if you and I had a mental health challenge and we were homeless, we're trying to break out of both of those things together, the wraparound service supports that you or I might need in that situation would be very different than services that YOU is providing. And there's multitude of different approaches that we have to take in the hubs. Having multiple hubs will allow us to flex the services in those hubs to meet the needs of the populations that are being served, and ultimately help people along their journey faster, because more specified supports in the places where people need them at the time that they need them will help people move to the next step. The worst possible thing that we can do is have someone be ready to take the next step and say, we don't have the capacity to help you with that, right? So wait here in the shelter until we have resources. You may move beyond your desire at that point to take that moment and transform it into something different for yourself.
Mm-hmm. At the beginning, you had mentioned confidence,
Yeah.
and that there's this one step forward, two steps back, or sometimes it's two steps forward, sometimes two forward and one back, but it's this ebb and flow of healing and growing and developing. And what you're saying is the more of these steps forward that we can give and the less barriers that we can create, the more confidence that individuals can build, specifically if the services can be geared more to the individual. Whereas I've seen in shelter systems before where everybody's kind of in the same
Yeah.
pool, and that also means you could have 80, 90, 100 people in the same space with their own illnesses colliding and creating more
Yep.
step backwards and more barriers. My daughter sent me a link the other day of the hubs, like
Yes.
an article about the hubs, and she says, "This is fantastic.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to do with this, Dad?" I'm like, "No, but it's wonderful. It's a great idea." So it's being noticed and it's being seen. That's for sure. What I would like to ask quickly is for our viewers. Help them to understand what wraparound means.
It means a number of different things, and as we design different hubs, you will see specific hubs for different populations. There will be an Indigenous-led hub that is not led by the regular consortium of people in the health and homelessness group. There will be likely a hub, for those who identify as women, right? Because of the complex supports that may be needed, especially with, as women are mainly caregivers, although that's not the way it should be, but that's often what happens is, you become homeless and you're also, you've got a child to take care of as well. Women are subject to, sexual and domestic abuse, usually by men, predominantly by men, I should say. And so, services in that hub, may involve not just housing supports. There may be some addiction supports, but there may be domestic violence and abuse counseling supports to help someone transition through those traumatic, experiences in their life that may be leading to some of the other challenges in what is a complex, these are why they're complex challenges, is because they can feed into each other. So wraparound service supports, generally, we want people to have housing supports. We want people to have healthcare supports, mental health counseling, addiction counseling, but also flex space where you could bring in from time to time, career writing workshops. You may be helping people do taxes for the first time, right? There are a number of things that you can supply in flex space within the hubs, but there are those core services that are mainly healthcare related that need to be in each and every one.
Fantastic. So what I'm hearing is the wraparound is exactly that. It's all encompassing. It's a biological, psychological, social interaction with all those services being wrapped around in the individual, like hopefully a warm hug to help them move forward with their struggles and taking the next steps in their journey.
Yeah, and that journey is done, with two things at the center of it, especially in the hub-based model. It's people-centered and housing-centered, right? So we're building the services around the people who need the services so that they're there when they need them in the way that they need them to help them take that step. But ultimately, if you don't have stable housing at the end of it, it is very hard to break out of those other things without, a stable, supportive place to live. And with housing affordability being a significant challenge, tackling the intersections of, mental health, addictions, and homelessness becomes almost insurmountable without a continuum of supports that has that housing step in it. And that housing step also is multifaceted. It may be housing with complex, significant wraparound supports. So you have wraparound supports in the hubs, but you transition people into perhaps an in-dwell-based environment with different levels of wraparound service supports. It may transition then into rent geared towards income housing because it's really a financial barrier at that point, or even below market rate housing. So we need to have that continuum to kind of flow people from what is the situation that they may be in today, all the way to, at the very end of their journey, stable, self-sufficient housing where possible.
So for our viewers, what I understand of the Housing First type initiative to make sure that people get into safe housing is we can recognize very quickly that mental health addiction and homelessness create safety issues, which then create psychological issues, which then exacerbates those symptoms, and being able to be in a safe environment makes all the difference in the world for them to grow and heal, right?
Yeah, I had a number of people who were at that first winter response we did who were successful in their journey. One of the things they said was having the environment where I could spend some time away from what were my own negative influences. In some cases, from an addiction perspective, they're a person who gives them access to drugs, or other people who are using, and you get group think and peer pressure for to not break out of the environment but stay with the group, to kind of have that opportunity to have a space where you can break away, focus on yourself, was beneficial for some. In others, they need a much more supportive environment where there is where you can see people who experience the same things as you. Some people need someone to travel on their journey with them that understands exactly what they're going through, and others need a little more independence. So the hub-based space is called low barrier because we don't want, you have to create those opportunities for someone to come into a space and then turn around and walk out of it, but then come into it next time and then maybe take advantage of one of the things in that space without obligation. Obviously, there are certain things you have to provide in the space. You can't allow for, violence or, endangering others. Like there are some basic general rules, but for the most part, it's very low barrier. It's not requiring, filling out a form or a complex series of things to access it. It is a place where people can go to feel safe, to get some basic needs met in their life, and then, but have all the tools there to take another step. And I keep saying the next step in their journey because it really isn't about what you or I think their journey is or how fast we think they should be proceeding in the steps. We may want to get them to a certain place, and I think they may too, but it's like, as a really bad analogy, I think to, everybody who's kind of gone through weight loss, right, which is very different. You lose a couple of pounds, then you add a couple, then if you focus on each of those steps, you can get very energized and very demoralized at different points. And so if you have the supports to keep you going along your journey, you'll be more successful in the long run. But it can be very difficult at those points, which is why there's also people being ready for the choice of taking a step, but then people having the supports necessary to allow them to be successful in that step.
I believe you when you said this is a complex issue. Yeah. So we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back with the Mayor, Josh Morgan. And welcome back to Invisible, where today's guest, Josh Morgan, is on and sharing all the wonderful things that the City of London is doing with us. Thank you again, Josh, for being here. I'm going to switch gears now. We could talk about those complex issues of homelessness and mental health and the front line that we call it in the field. We call it the front line. We could talk about that for hours and hours because it is so complex. What I was hoping to talk about for the next 5-10 minutes would be about how substance use and addiction is impacting the rest of the community. So that marginalized is a small percentage, but we also have this really big impact with cannabis shops popping up everywhere, liquor in the grocery stores. I mean, we're surrounded by this substance use billboards and all that other stuff, and it has a huge impact on our society as a whole. And I wanted to talk more about what that might look like from the city's perspective.
Yeah, I'm glad that we're focusing on this too, because this is very much often a hidden issue, right? Where you can have friends and neighbors, you look at them every day, you say hi every morning, and yet they can be very much struggling with some of these challenges, and yet leading what appears to be high functioning lives, right? And that's a real challenge because it's hard to know to reach out to people when you don't know that they're suffering with mental health or even an addictions issue, despite the fact that they may have very supportive individuals around them. And so talking about it and bringing it to light, I think, is one of the most important things we can do. And I think, we would be remiss if we all didn't recognize that we probably all experienced multiple, mental health challenges in their lives. I would certainly say, as someone who's been on council for 8 years and the mayor of the city, it's a highly stressful job. The intersection of me trying to meet the obligations that the public put on me, with having 4 kids, with a very successful and busy spouse who has her career development that's going on too, with all of the challenges that that has in your life, there can be a lot of pressure. And there are times when you just need to find a way to give yourself that break, or at least recognize that you may be struggling mentally from time to time, and find what helps you through that journey. Because ignoring it can let it fester and grow and become into larger problems that can impact then your relationship with your family, your relationship with your job, your ability to function. Sometimes it leads to paying bills, and then we get into that whole other thing that we talked about in the first half. So, I think you said, what's the city doing on this? The best possible thing we can do is not necessarily a city-led big initiative. It's us breaking the stigma of talking about this, making it okay to talk with a neighbor to say they're struggling, or reach out for help, or discuss with your family doctor or health practitioner. Anybody, rather than keeping it in, is that first step to keeping your own challenges in check. And if you already have the challenges, it's the path towards tackling and overcoming them.
So you mentioned it now, and you mentioned it earlier, and I think most of the viewers know that you have 4 children.
Yeah.
And we're constantly trying to create a barrier and keep our children safe, obviously, and protect them from this community, from substance use and how it impacts the community. Is there anything specifically as a father that you recognize and note that is important to you when it comes to how your children see and or view substance use addiction and mental health?
Yeah, so my kids are all at different spectrums in this, because I've got the oldest who's in first year of high school, and the youngest who's only 2.
Okay.
Right? So I probably don't talk to him too much about it, because he's more into Paw Patrol than he is complex and challenging issues. But certainly, we've chatted with the other 3 in different ways because of the different stages they're at. Obviously, with my oldest daughter in high school, access to drugs, substances, those sorts of things that we all know happen when you get older, and then only become more accessible when you move into if you go to university or college. There's more opportunities for this. Having those conversations about what it is. I know the education system does put it in place, but being open and trying to create, although it's hard with a teenager, the ability to have that comfortable space where she can come to us, or even my mom, like grandma, and let us know what she might be facing, let us know the pressures that are on her, because often, these can start by external pressures. Someone pushing someone into trying something, someone pushing someone into something that they might not want to do, that doesn't necessarily fit with their own character, and resisting that. Also, we talk about not being the person who does that, not being the person who is pushing others into spaces where they're uncomfortable, because there's you can't presume that your kids or the people aren't the ones who might be being that influence on others in a negative way. So being very open and talking about it is really the first step. And again, there are lots of supports out there in the community, and there are lots of websites for those who may not know. Okay, well, my child is 7. What do I talk to a 7-year-old about? When is it the right time to talk about what? There are many resources in the community that can be accessed to give you some guidance on that. And I always say, we have excellent access to family health practitioners in the city. Whether you have a family doctor or not, there's usually the ability to access those resources. And if you're ever unsure, there are people who you can just talk to as that first step of finding out information. So that's how my wife and I have approached it. Is we've tried to foster as much as we possibly can, a safe environment for our kids to talk to us about anything first, so that we can know what is the next thing we need to talk to them about, right? So we can kind of see where they are on the path of their experiences in their life too.
Wonderful. I agree with you that there's things we can reach out, we can have these conversations. We have to educate ourselves in order to educate our children and figure out what makes sense. It's not about shielding, it's not about blocking them off or creating more stigma or some uncertainty around those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember, and I'll tell the story, my mom will probably regret that I told it, but when I was younger, I had a group of friends, and we were probably, I don't know if it was upper years of high school. We camped out in my friend's backyard, and we had a couple of drinks. I think his older brother bought us beer, right? So I hope I'm not getting him in trouble, years and years later. And we thought we were very sneaky, and we were trying whatever this was, alcohol in the backyard, and maybe consuming a bit. I didn't realize it until later that every one of our parents knew that was happening, and that they were kind of watching us, and that they felt like, rather than push us away into who knows where else, we're sneaking down to the lake or whatever, that was probably the safest place for us to try something, and then end up having the wherewithal to know what stage we were going through in our lives, so that they could talk to us about the risks and dangers of what we were potentially experimenting with as young individuals, right? So I think that's a really hard thing for parents to do, to recognize that their children are going to be tempted. Their children probably are going to try alcohol. They may try marijuana or some kind of drug at some point, cannabis. If you don't have the safe space, it's going to be hidden. You may not know where they are. But if you have the ability to talk to them, and you have the ability to even coordinate with other parents, although I was a little upset when I found out about that, because there was this whole parent group working against us. I now see back, that was a really incredible thing that they did, right? Yeah. To be so aware of what their kids were doing, that they talked about it. And think about it, these parents would have had to talk to each other about this. That level of communication, I think, is really what helps you have the conversations, that awareness, that education that they had. And why wouldn't we have tried drinking? I think all of our parents drank, right? So there's habits that we learned, and we wanted to try it too. So we did. And apparently we did it in a much safer environment than we could have, but unaware to ourselves.
Absolutely. There's so much truth in there, and we're going to have to wrap up now. But I appreciate your vulnerability. I appreciate you sharing that story with us. I can see it and recognize the value in kids being able to explore and be kids and not have to, hide things. And when it's taboo, it becomes more attractive. And then I go learn those things from people that I probably shouldn't learn those things from. So there's definitely some value in that. So I thank you very much for being on the show today. It's been a pleasure, and it's been a great listening to you share about what's going on in the city.
Yeah, my pleasure. I try to share things very genuinely and honestly. That means I don't always make everybody happy with what I share, but I think it's better to speak what the truth is and confront things head on. So I appreciate that your show does that, and you've given me the opportunity to be here.
So wonderful. Thanks again. And thank you for watching Invisible Breaking Through the Stigma of Addiction. We'll see you next time.